Before you hear my story, I need you to do something for me. If you've ever poured your soul into something, a project, a piece of art, a relationship, only to have it ripped away and signed with someone else's name, I need you to hit that like button. It helps me to know that I'm not just speaking into the void, that there are others out there who understand what it feels like to be erased. Because that's what he tried to do to me. He tried to erase me, and he almost succeeded. My name is Evelyn, and for 3 years my world was a universe of polymer chains, stress load calculations, and the quiet hum of a 3D printer in the dead of night. I was a junior architect at one of the city's most prestigious firms, a place with glass walls and egos to match. My project, my life's work, was a modular housing model for disaster relief. I called it the Athelred Unit. It was fast, it was resilient, and it was revolutionary. It could be deployed by helicopter and assembled by a team of 4 in under 6 hours. It was designed to be a home when a home was the one thing people had lost. And my mentor, the celebrated Magnus Thorne, told me it was brilliant. He nurtured it, he championed it, and then he stole it. The betrayal wasn't a single clean cut. It was 1,000 tiny paper cuts that bled me out over time. It culminated on a Tuesday, under the vaulted ceilings of City Hall. I was in the 3rd row, wearing a new suit I couldn't really afford, my heart hammering against my ribs. Magnus was at the podium, basking in the glow of the spotlights. Behind him, on a massive screen, were my schematics, my renderings, my work. He was presenting the Athelred Unit as his own signature project to secure a landmark city contract, a contract that would redefine post-disaster response for the entire region. I watched him use my words, my phrasing, my passion. He even used the little joke I'd made about the interlocking mechanism being as simple and satisfying as a child's toy block. The city council was eating it up, and with every round of applause, a piece of my professional soul withered and died. 2 days later, the contract was announced. The firm was ecstatic. Magnus was a hero. He called me into his office, that minimalist glass box that always felt like an interrogation room. I walked in expecting, at the very least, a quiet acknowledgement, a thank you, maybe even a junior partnership on the project. He was smiling, leaning back in his chair, a king on his throne. He told me congratulations were in order. For a second, a foolish, naive second, I thought he meant for me. He said the firm had landed the biggest contract in its history, and that my support on the preliminary research had been noted. Preliminary research, 3 years of my life, reduced to a footnote. Then came the kill shot. He told me he was moving me. He said with the new contract, the firm was restructuring, and he had the perfect new role for me, a place where my unique skills would be invaluable. He was reassigning me to the corporate archives, a windowless room in the basement filled with 2 decades of forgotten blueprints and dusty project binders. He said, and I will never forget the casual cruelty in his voice, your style, Evelyn. It's just a little too academic for real-world application. It's excellent for theory, but this project needs a more pragmatic hand. My hands went cold, my vision narrowed to a tiny point, focusing on the smug, self-satisfied curve of his lips. Too academic. The design he had just used to win a multi-million-dollar contract was too academic. The man who couldn't even run the foundational physics simulations without my help was telling me I wasn't practical enough. He didn't know. He couldn't possibly know. In his arrogance, in his complete and utter dismissal of me as a person, he had overlooked the one thing that mattered. He saw the design, but he didn't understand the heart of it. The entire structural integrity of the Athelred Unit, the very thing that made it strong enough to withstand aftershocks and cheap enough for mass production, relied on a specific proprietary composite material. It was called Valerite, and it came from a small independent supplier, a supplier that did business with no one else. That supplier was my family's company, Vance Composites, and since the passing of my parents 2 years ago, I, Evelyn Vance, was the sole executor of its exclusive contracts. The city's first, massive order for 1,000 Athelred units was placed the following week, and that was when the materials, the very soul of my design, became suddenly, completely, and indefinitely unavailable to Magnus Thorne's firm. The war had started. He just didn't know he was already losing. The archives smelled of decaying paper and forgotten ambitions. It was a tomb, and Magnus had made me its keeper. The single fluorescent light fixture hummed a mournful, monotonous tune, casting long, distorted shadows that made the shelves of project binders look like rows of tombstones. My new desk was a slab of cheap particle board, wedged into a corner. On it sat a beige, ancient computer terminal that probably predated my career. My first task, according to the sterile email from HR, was to digitize the firm's projects from 1995 to 2005. It was a corporate burial. I was being paid to disappear. For the first few hours, I just sat there. The professional composure I had maintained in Magnus's office, the rigid mask I had worn as I packed my things from my sunlit cubicle upstairs, it all just crumbled away. AT for B. AT for B. The silence of the basement was absolute, broken only by that electric hum and the frantic, ragged sound of my own breathing. I dropped my head into my hands, the rough texture of the cheap desk pressing into my forehead. A wave of something hot and suffocating washed over me. It was the full, crushing weight of the last 3 years, the all-nighters fueled by stale coffee, and a burning belief that I was creating something good. The weekends I'd sacrificed, the friendships that had withered from neglect, the dates I'd canceled, all of it for him, for his glory. The humiliation was a physical thing. It felt like I had swallowed a stone. I thought of the condescending smile on his face, too academic. The words echoed in the dead air of the archive, each repetition a fresh stab of betrayal. He hadn't just stolen my work, he had insulted my very essence, the meticulous, research-driven core of who I was as an architect. He'd taken my greatest strength and reframed it as a weakness, a liability, and the worst part, the part that truly hollowed me out, was that I had let him. I had trusted him. I leaned back in the creaking chair, staring up at the concrete ceiling, crisscrossed with dusty pipes. The memories started to flood in, not as gentle waves but as a violent, churning tide. I remembered the day I first brought the concept to him. I was barely a year into my job, still radiating the nervous energy of a recent graduate. I had a portfolio of sketches, a binder thick with preliminary material research. I'd been working on the idea in my own time, an obsession born from watching news reports of earthquake-shattered towns and hurricane-ravaged coastlines. The inefficiency of traditional relief shelters drove me mad. They were slow, expensive, and demoralizing. I believed we could do better. Magnus had listened, his brow furrowed in concentration. He'd flipped through my sketches, tapped a long, elegant finger on a calculation I'd made about wind load resistance. He looked up at me, his eyes sharp and assessing, and said, "This is not a project, Aveline. This is a legacy." He became my champion. He secured a small internal budget for me, gave me a dedicated workstation, and shielded me from the mundane churn of corporate projects. He told me to focus, to innovate, to build the future. He made me feel seen. He made me feel valued. It was intoxicating. Now, sitting in this basement crypt, I saw it for what it was, a grooming process. He wasn't cultivating a prodigy. He was cultivating an asset, a ghostwriter for his own ambition. The red flags were there all along, of course. They always are, in retrospect. There was the time a senior partner had walked by my desk and asked what I was working on. Before I could answer, Magnus had swept in, put a paternal hand on my shoulder, and said, "Aveline is assisting me with some exploratory concepts for a new pro bono initiative." Assisting me. The words slid by so smoothly, I barely registered the sting. Then there was the first internal presentation to the executive committee. I had worked for a week on my speech, practicing it in the mirror until I could recite the material specifications in my sleep. An hour before the meeting, Magnus told me he thought it would have more impact coming from a senior architect. He would present on my behalf. It's about strategy, Aveline, he'd said. You have to know how to play the game. I sat in the back of the room and watched him receive a standing ovation for my data. I convinced myself it was for the good of the project. His seniority gave it weight. His influence gave it a chance. This is what I told myself. It was a lie, a carefully constructed piece of self-deception to mask the truth. I was afraid. Afraid of confrontation. Afraid of losing my one champion. Afraid of being just another junior architect with a folder full of forgotten dreams. My loyalty wasn't born of respect. It was born of fear. And Magnus, like a predator, had smelled it. My mind drifted further back, to the source of it all. The source of the Athelred unit, and the material that gave it life. My father, Alistair Vance, was not an architect, but a materials scientist, a brilliant, obsessive man who saw the world in molecular bonds and tensile strengths. Our family home was less a house, and more a laboratory with beds. He and my mother, a shrewd businesswoman with a knack for logistics, had founded Vance Composites in our garage. Their flagship product, their life's work, was Valerite. I remember being a little girl, maybe 7 or 8, standing on a stool in his workshop, the air thick with the strange, clean smell of curing polymers. He was holding a small feather-light sheet of the material, a dull, slate-gray square. He handed it to me. It was cool to the touch, and weighed almost nothing. Then he took a hammer and brought it down hard on an identical sheet resting on an anvil. The sound wasn't the sharp crack I expected, but a dull, resonant thud. The hammer bounced off, leaving not so much as a scratch. My eyes went wide. He smiled. It's not about being hard, Avi, he told me. That's the mistake everyone makes. Brittle things break. This is about distribution. The impact doesn't shatter it. It flows through it, like water. It cheats gravity and violence by yielding just a little. He spent 20 years perfecting it. It was his masterpiece. My mother was the one who saw its potential beyond the niche aerospace applications it was designed for. She was the one who built the company, who negotiated the first contracts, who turned my father's brilliant obsession into a viable business. Their partnership was a perfect fusion of science and strategy. They were a closed system, a complete unit. Vance Composites was never meant to be a giant. It was a boutique, a specialist. They prized quality and innovation over scale. Their motto, which was printed on the back of their simple business cards, was Fortis in Subtilis, strength in subtlety. My mother passed away first, a sudden illness that stole her fire far too soon. My father was lost without her. The business continued, but the spark was gone. He followed her 2 years later, his heart giving out one quiet Tuesday morning in his workshop. He was 62. In the span of 3 years, I had lost them both. As their only child, I inherited everything: the house, the workshop, and the company. I became the sole owner and executor of Vance Composites. For months, I didn't know what to do with it. The company had 2 long-term, low-volume contracts with experimental aviation firms. The day-to-day was handled by a semi-retired plant manager, a man named Elias who had worked with my father for 30 years. I was an architect, not a CEO. The weight of their legacy felt like a shroud. I considered selling it. It seemed like the simplest, most logical path, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. It felt like selling my own childhood, like auctioning off my father's soul. It was during that period of grief and confusion that the idea for the Athelred unit began to form. I was looking at a sheet of Valerite one evening, remembering my father's words about distributing impact. I thought about the images on the news, the flimsy tents, the splintered remains of homes. What if you could build a shelter out of something that didn't fight the storm, but flowed with it? Something lightweight enough for rapid deployment, yet strong enough to be a true sanctuary. Valerite was the answer. It wasn't just an ingredient, it was the entire concept. The design was impossible without it. The interlocking panels, the frame that could flex and resettle, the very physics of the structure, it all depended on the unique properties my father had engineered into that slate-gray polymer. That's when I made a decision. I wouldn't sell the company. I would protect it. I met with the family lawyer, a dry, meticulous man named Mr. Abernathy. I explained that I wanted to restructure the company's charter. I wanted to ensure that my parents' creation would never be mass-produced, diluted, or sold off to the highest bidder. We drew up new articles of incorporation. We created ironclad, exclusive supply contracts. And we wrote in a specific, peculiar clause, a clause stating that all new contracts, all extensions, and all decisions regarding the allocation of Valorite production must be approved and executed, in person or by direct, notarized command, by the sole executor of the Vance estate. That was me. It was a legal fortress, designed to protect a legacy. At the time, I thought I was protecting it from faceless corporate raiders or opportunistic competitors. I never imagined I would be using it to protect it from my own boss. Sitting there, in the cold, stale air of the archive, the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The grief that had paralyzed me began to recede, replaced by something else. It was a cold, quiet anger, a clarity that was as sharp and clean as a shard of glass. Magnus had made a critical error. He had studied my blueprints, but he had never bothered to study me. He saw a junior architect, a subordinate. He didn't see Aveline Vance, the daughter of Alistair and Eleanor Vance, the guardian of Valorite. He thought he had buried me in this basement. He had no idea he'd just given me the perfect, quiet, hidden command center from which to launch my counteroffensive. The catalyst wasn't a sudden burst of inspiration. It was the slow, dawning realization of the power I already held. It was the memory of my father's hand on a sheet of Valorite, the pride in my mother's eyes as she closed a deal. It was their legacy, and Magnus was about to learn that you do not build a house on stolen ground. The foundation will always, always crumble. My resolve hardened. It wasn't about revenge. I kept telling myself that. It was about restoration. It was about correcting a fundamental error in the structure of my world. And the first step was to wait for the noise to begin upstairs, while I sat in perfect, strategic silence. The plan, when it crystallized, wasn't a complex, multi-stage operation. It was brutally, elegantly simple. My power didn't lie in what I would do, but in what I would not do. I would not answer the phone. I would not reply to the emails. I would not sign the production order. I would simply be unavailable. My father had built Valorite to absorb and redirect force. I would do the same. I would let Magnus's frantic energy, his arrogance, and his panic crash against a wall of absolute silence and watch it dissipate into nothing. But silence, to be effective, needs to be paired with perfect information. I needed to know what was happening upstairs, in the world of light and air and panic. I couldn't be blind in my basement fortress. I needed an ally. My mind immediately went to Clara. Clara was a paralegal, tucked away in the firm's bustling legal department. She was young, fiercely intelligent, and perpetually underestimated. She wore vintage band t-shirts under her corporate blazers, and had a mind like a steel trap. We weren't close friends, but we shared a foxhole camaraderie. We'd been thrown together on a few late-night document review sessions for Magnus, and I'd seen the way he treated her. He'd call her sweetheart, ask her to fetch him coffee in the middle of complex contract analysis, and often mispronounced her name. He saw her as a functionary, a clerical afterthought. I saw her as one of the sharpest people in the building. I had made a point to learn her name, to ask about the obscure post-punk band on her shirt, to thank her specifically in project-wide emails for her meticulous work. I had built a bridge of respect, not out of strategy, but out of basic human decency. Now, I hoped that bridge would hold. I sent her a message on a secure encrypted app we'd used once to complain about a particularly dreadful HR seminar. The message was short. Coffee, my new subterranean office. Bring your own flashlight. She arrived 20 minutes later, a steaming mug in each hand, her expression a mixture of curiosity and concern. She took in the depressing scene. the dusty shelves, the humming light, my particle board desk. She shook her head. They really put you in the penalty box, huh? What did you do? Tell Magnus his hair wasn't as great as he thinks it is. I gave her a weak smile. Something like that. I told her the whole story. I left nothing out. The 3 years of work, the presentation at City Hall, the 2 academic comment, the exile to the archives. As I spoke, her look of wry amusement hardened into a quiet fury. Her knuckles were white around her coffee mug. That man, she said, her voice low and tight. He's a black hole in a bespoke suit. He just sucks all the light and credit out of the room. I've seen him do it to a dozen people, Evelyn. But this is a masterpiece of theft. I then told her the second part of the story, about Vance Composites, about Valorite, about the fact that I was the sole, unmovable gatekeeper to the most critical component in the firm's biggest ever contract. Clara's eyes widened. She put her mug down on the corner of the desk. A sharp click in the silence. She was silent for a full minute, her sharp legal mind processing the implications. Then a slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. "Oh, Evelyn," she breathed. "Oh, this is beautiful. This is poetic justice on a molecular level." I told her my plan of inaction. She nodded, her mind already racing ahead. "You'll be a ghost," she said. "But ghosts need to be able to see. You need to know when they start to panic, when they start to break. You need to know what their countermoves are before they make them. That's where I come in." Clara became my eyes and ears, my intelligence agent on the inside. Her first mission was simple. I needed a copy of the final, executed contract between the firm and the city, and I needed the firm's supply chain agreement for the Athelred project. I had to be certain Magnus hadn't found a loophole, some alternative material specification I didn't know about. It was a risk for her. Accessing those documents for a non-essential basement-dwelling employee was a fireable offense. She didn't even hesitate. "Consider it done," she said. "It's the least I can do for a fellow member of the Too Smart for Her Own Good club." While Clara went to work, I focused on my own preparations. My father's old office at the Vance Composites plant was exactly as he'd left it. It was a museum of his mind, cluttered with prototypes, geological maps, and stacks of academic journals. I spent a weekend there, not in grief, but in study. I wasn't just Evelyn the architect anymore. I had to become Evelyn Vance, CEO. I pulled out all the corporate records, the supply chain manifests, the material data sheets. I reread the contracts we had with our few other clients, the ones my mother had negotiated. I studied the language, the terms, the subtle leverage points she had built into every single one, and that's where I found it. It was a detail I'd forgotten, a piece of my mother's shrewd business acumen that was about to become my sharpest weapon. In every Vance Composites supply contract, including the dormant boilerplate agreement we had on file for large-scale projects, there was a clause she had titled the Integrity Proviso. It was a piece of legal genius, disguised as a quality control measure. It stated that Vance Composites reserved the right to refuse to supply Valorite for any project where the final application or structural context could, in the company's sole judgment, compromise the material's performance integrity or bring its reputation into disrepute. In plain English, if we thought you were going to use our material in a shoddy, unsafe, or unethical way, we could cut you off. No questions asked. My mother had designed it to stop companies from cutting corners, from using Valorite in conjunction with substandard materials that might fail and lead to a lawsuit that would tarnish the Vance name. It was a shield, but a shield can also be a weapon. Magnus, in his haste and arrogance, had stolen my design but not my principles. He was a corner cutter. He was a man driven by budget and ego. It was almost certain that he would try to substitute cheaper components elsewhere in the Athelred unit to maximize his profit margin. My mother's integrity proviso gave me the perfect, legally sound reason to refuse his order. I wasn't just being unavailable. I was upholding my family's and my company's core ethical standards. This was my plausible inaccuracy, a legal clause so powerful and one-sided, it would be highly contestable in a real court, but in the court of this narrative, it was an ironclad fortress wall. The next day, Clara slipped a plain manila envelope onto my desk. Inside were the documents. I spent hours poring over them, the hum of the fluorescent light, my only companion. The city contract was exactly as I feared. It listed the Athelred unit by name and referenced my original technical specifications down to the millimeter. And there, on page 47 under Material Requirements, was the fatal word volarite. It didn't say volarite or an equivalent composite. It said volarite. Magnus had been so confident, so eager to claim my innovation, that he had written the name of his own poison into the contract. He had handed the city a gun and pointed it at his own head. The supply chain agreement was even better. It was a rushed boilerplate document that simply stated the firm would procure volarite from its sole licensed manufacturer, Vance Composites. No backup, no alternative. It was a testament to his supreme arrogance. He never for a moment considered that the humble little supplier from my research proposal could be a problem. Why would he? In his world, small players were there to be acquired or crushed. They were not obstacles. Now everything was in place. The legal justification, the insider intelligence, the impenetrable fortress of my family's company. I sat back in my chair, the documents spread out before me like a battle map. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. It was the calm of the engineer who has checked every calculation, the calm of the strategist who sees the entire board. I wasn't emotional. I wasn't acting out of anger. I was simply executing a plan. I was resetting a system that had been thrown out of balance. I took the thick binder containing my father's original research on volarite from my bag. On the first page, in his neat, meticulous script, was the dedication for Eleanor, the structure to my science. Below it, my mother had scrawled a note in her looping, confident handwriting. And for Evelyn, who will build the future with it. I closed the binder. The future they imagined was about to begin. All I had to do was wait for the phone to ring, and I knew with absolute certainty that it would. The silence was about to become deafening. The first tremor hit on a Thursday afternoon. It wasn't a call to me, but a frantic series of messages that flickered across my encrypted chat with Clara. The city had officially signed the purchase order, 1,000 Athelred units, with the first 100 scheduled for delivery in 60 days to a staging area for a hurricane-ravaged coastal community. The clock was now ticking. Loudly, Clara's messages painted a vivid picture of the scene upstairs. Procurement is scrambling. Gerald is turning a very ugly shade of purple. He's been trying to contact Vance Composites all morning. Gerald was the firm's head of procurement, a man whose entire personality was a stress-induced ulcer. He was a bulldog, effective but unpleasant. I could picture him perfectly, hammering the phone, his face getting redder with each unanswered call. The main line goes to a voicemail. The sales email is bouncing back as undeliverable. I had, of course, spent the previous evening setting this up. The main line to Vance Composites now redirected to a new number, a burner phone sitting in my desk drawer. The generic sales at and info at email addresses now forwarded to a new unmonitored account I had created. I had severed every conventional line of communication. They were shouting into a void I had personally engineered. I continued my work, my official work, with a placid focus that felt almost zen-like. I scanned old blueprints from a 1998 bank headquarters project, my movements methodical and slow. The musty smell of the paper, the rhythmic whir of the scanner, it was the perfect camouflage. I was the forgotten archivist in the basement, a ghost in the machine. No one would ever think to connect me to the supply chain crisis brewing 3 floors above. The next day, the tremors intensified. Clara sent another update. Magnus just stormed through the department. He was yelling at Gerald, something about incompetence, something about finding this tin pot company and forcing them to answer the phone. He's putting a junior analyst on it to do a deep dive on Vance Composites. A smile touched my lips. A deep dive. Let them dive. They would find a registered business address, a few outdated articles about my father's aerospace work, and a string of unanswered phone numbers. They would find a ghost company, a corporate mirage. Magnus, true to form, tried to solve the problem by throwing his weight around. He saw it as a simple logistical snag, a stubborn supplier who needed to be strong-armed into compliance. His entire worldview was based on a hierarchy of power, and he was at the top. The possibility that he had no leverage at all had not yet entered his mind. A few days later, he made a rare appearance in the basement. He didn't come to my desk, but strode through the main aisle, ostensibly looking for an old project file. He was performing. He wanted to be seen, to project an air of calm control. He caught my eye as he passed. "Aveline," he said, his voice smooth and casual. "Good to see you're settling in. Keeping busy?" "Very busy, Magnus," I replied, my voice perfectly even. I held up a dusty roll of schematics, just cataloging the old First National Tower project. Fascinating foundation work. He gave a tight, patronizing smile. "Excellent. Glad you've found your niche." He paused, a flicker of something annoyance, curiosity, in his eyes. "By the way, in your old research for the modular project, you mentioned a small supplier, a materials company, Vance Composites. You don't happen to have a direct contact for them, do you? The number we have seems to be out of date." The question was posed with such calculated nonchalance it was almost comical. He was asking the prisoner for the keys to the castle, without realizing who he was talking to. This was a critical moment. My response had to be perfect. Not too helpful, not too hostile, just unhelpful. I furrowed my brow, feigning deep thought. I tapped a finger on my chin. Vance Composites, right. They were a very small, very specialized outfit. I think I found them in an old academic journal. I'm not sure I ever had a direct name, just a general inquiry line. I'm sorry. My heart was beating a steady rhythmic tattoo against my ribs. It was a lie, delivered with the bland sincerity of a helpful subordinate. I watched his face. The mask of calm didn't slip, but I saw a muscle jump in his jaw. He had expected me to have the answer. He still saw me as his research assistant. "No matter," he said, a little too quickly. "Our people will track them down." He turned and walked away, his expensive shoes echoing on the concrete floor. Clara's message came an hour later. The deep dive on Vance came up empty. They can't find a single human employee. Magnus is now convinced it's a shell company for a larger competitor trying to screw with him. The paranoia is setting in. It's glorious. The next phase of the panic began, the search for an alternative. Magnus, now realizing he couldn't bully a ghost, tasked his engineering department with finding a substitute for Valorite. It was the move I had anticipated. It was also doomed to fail. For 2 weeks, a quiet hum of desperation emanated from the 3rd floor. I heard snippets of conversations in the elevator. I saw harried-looking engineers clutching material data sheets. Clara fed me the details. They had tested a dozen different composites. Carbon fiber was too brittle and expensive. Reinforced polymers were too heavy, throwing off the deployment logistics that were a key part of the city contract. Nothing had Valorite's unique combination of lightness, tensile strength, and flexibility. Nothing could meet the specifications that Magnus himself had so confidently guaranteed to the city. My design was a closed loop. The material enabled the design, and the design demanded the material. There was no substitute. The first call from the city came 3 weeks after the PO was signed. Clara forwarded me the email chain. Mr. Sterling, the city's project manager, was a man known for his calm demeanor and ruthless efficiency. His first email to Magnus was polite. "Mr. Thorne, I'm writing to request a preliminary production schedule for the Athelred units. As you know, the timeline is critical." Magnus's reply, which Clara had to get from his assistant's outbox, was a masterpiece of corporate evasion. "Mr. Sterling, absolutely. We are currently finalizing our material sourcing to ensure maximum cost-effectiveness and durability. Our commitment to quality is paramount. Schedule to follow shortly." A week passed. Sterling's second email was less polite. "Magnus, I need that schedule by end of day tomorrow. The first convoy of trucks is booked. Any delay on our end has a significant cost implication." Magnus's response was even more vague. full of jargon about supply chain optimization and stress testing next-generation material options. He was tap dancing, and he was running out of floor. The true panic began when Sterling stopped emailing and picked up the phone. Clara described the scene outside Magnus's glass office. He was pacing, shouting into his phone, his voice a low, angry buzz that was audible even through the soundproofed walls. He was used to being the one who made demands, the one who set the timeline. He was not used to being held accountable. The beauty of my plan, the part that brought a cold, quiet satisfaction, was that I was doing nothing wrong. I was simply fulfilling the duties of my new menial position. I came in on time. I scanned my documents. I was a model employee. My name was nowhere near the chaos. I was in the eye of the hurricane, a point of perfect, placid calm while the world ripped itself apart just a few feet away. I was a ghost in the machine, but I was also the ghost in Magnus's head, the unresolved variable. The man who had erased me was now being haunted by a question he couldn't answer. Where in the world was Vance Composites? He was looking for a company, a building, a CEO he could intimidate. He never once thought to look down into the dusty, forgotten basement where he had hidden the answer all along. The breaking point arrived in the form of a certified letter. Clara sent me a photo of it, her hand trembling slightly in the picture. It was from the city's legal department. The letter was polite, formal, and utterly lethal. It cited the failure to supply clause in the contract. It stated that if the firm could not provide a viable production schedule and proof of material acquisition within 10 business days, the city would be forced to terminate the agreement and enact the penalty clauses. The penalties were astronomical, enough to wipe out the firm's profits for the entire year. The letter landed on Magnus's desk like a grenade, and according to Clara, the entire executive floor went into lockdown. Meetings were held behind closed doors. Her voices were raised. The air of celebration that had filled the firm for weeks had evaporated, replaced by the cold, metallic scent of fear. The Athelred project, Magnus's crowning achievement, was now an existential threat. It was during this period of chaos that the city's project manager, Mr. Sterling, began his own investigation. Sterling was an old-school civil engineer, a man who had spent 40 years building bridges and tunnels. He believed in blueprints, not buzzwords. Magnus's evasions had tripped every alarm bell in his pragmatic mind. He started digging. He pulled the original proposal documents, the ones submitted before Magnus had scrubbed my name from everything. And there, buried in an appendix of preliminary research, he found what he was looking for: Evelyn Vance, junior architect, project lead on initial concept development. My phone rang on a Tuesday morning. It was a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a message appeared. It was brief and to the point. Miss Vance, my name is Robert Sterling. I am the project manager for the city's disaster relief housing initiative. I believe you and I need to have a conversation. I think you might be the only person who can tell me what is actually going on. He had found me. The quiet part was over. I took a deep breath, my heart a slow, heavy drum. I walked out of the archives, up the concrete stairs, and out of the building into the bright, clear light of day. I found a small park bench and called him back. Miss Vance, his voice was calm, weary. Thank you for calling me back. I'm going to be direct. My contract is with your firm, but your firm appears to be incapable of building the product they sold me. They can't source the primary material, valerite. My own research suggests this material is unique. My research also suggests you are the expert on it. So I'm asking you, architect to engineer, what is going on? I chose my words with surgical precision. I did not slander Magnus. I did not complain about being mistreated. I simply stated facts. Mr. Sterling, you are correct. Valerite is a unique material, and it is essential to the Athelred design. It is manufactured by a private company, Vance Composites. I am familiar with their work. He was silent for a moment. Familiar, Miss Vance? My sources tell me you are more than familiar. They tell me your name is on the company's original incorporation papers. I paused. He had done his homework. So you know, I said. I know that the man who sold me a revolutionary housing unit seems to have alienated the only person on Earth who can actually build it. So I'll ask again, what is going on? I took a breath. Mr. Sterling, Vance Composites has a long-standing policy. It's called the Integrity Proviso. The company reserves the right to refuse to supply materials for any project it believes is being managed in a way that could compromise the final product's safety or integrity. Magnus Thorne's firm currently does not meet our standards for partnership. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of traffic. Then I heard a low chuckle. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated understanding. The Integrity Proviso, he said, a note of admiration in his voice. That's a hell of a clause. So he stole your design, and now you won't sell him the bricks. It wasn't about theft, Mr. Sterling, I said, the words feeling practiced and true, even if they were a lie. It's about ensuring that shelters for vulnerable people are built correctly, without compromise. The Athelred unit, as designed, is safe. I cannot vouch for a version of it built by a man who values profit margins over structural integrity. Another pause. Okay, Miss Vance, I understand. One last question. Is Vance Composites still in business? Is Valerite still in production? Yes, sir, I said. We are, and it is. Good, he said, and the line went dead. The fallout was immediate. Magnus must have been alerted that Sterling had contacted me. The next morning, he was waiting for me when I got to the archives. He wasn't smiling. The mask of the charming, confident executive was gone. In its place was a raw, naked panic. Aveline, he said, blocking my path to the door. We need to talk. I looked at him, my expression a perfect blank. About the 1998 First National Tower project. I've almost finished scanning the HVAC schematics. Don't play games with me, he hissed, his voice a low whisper. Sterling called you. What did you tell him? I told him the truth, Magnus. That Vance Composites has concerns about the project's management. His face contorted into a mask of disbelief. Vance Composites, your Vance Composites, your family? I just looked at him. I didn't need to answer. He knew. The blood drained from his face. It was beautiful. He finally understood the scale of his miscalculation. He had thought he was playing chess with a pawn, only to discover it was the queen, and she had him in checkmate from the very beginning. His entire demeanor shifted. The aggression melted away, replaced by a desperate, cloying charm. Aveline, listen to me. There's been a misunderstanding. A terrible misunderstanding. My comment about your style, that was just a poor choice of words. I was under pressure. You know how it is. I don't, actually, I said, my voice as cold and quiet as the basement air. He pressed on, his words tumbling out in a frantic rush. This project, it was always your project. I was just giving it a platform. I was going to bring you in, lead architect. I was waiting for the right moment. Hey, this is it. We can fix this. You and me. Name your price. A partnership? A stake in the company? Anything. Just make the call. Tell your people to release the materials. It was the most pathetic, transparent display of desperation I had ever witnessed. He was offering me everything he had denied me, everything he had stolen, now that his own world was on fire. He saw it as a transaction. He still didn't understand. I looked him straight in the eye. Magnus, you told me my style was too academic for real-world application. I've decided to take your advice. I'm focusing on my research now. At my family's company, I find the work far more rewarding. I stepped around him and walked to my desk, my back straight, my hands steady. I could feel his eyes on me, burning with a mixture of hatred and helpless fury. He stood there for a full minute, silent, and then he turned and stormed out. The king had been deposed. He just hadn't been officially beheaded yet. That was scheduled for the following week. The final meeting was held in the firm's main boardroom, a cavernous space on the top floor with a panoramic view of the city. The table was a single, massive slab of polished mahogany that felt like a sacrificial altar. On one side sat the firm's leadership, the CEO, the COO, and a pale, haggard-looking Magnus Thorne. On the other side sat Robert Sterling from the city, accompanied by two of the city's top lawyers. I was not there as Aveline, the archivist. Clara had sent me a text that morning. Sterling's assistant just called. You have a guest pass waiting for you at the front desk. Your name tag reads Aveline Vance, CEO, Vance Composites. I walked in 5 minutes late. All heads turned. Magnus stared at me, his face a mask of pure disbelief. I wasn't wearing my usual drab office attire. I was wearing a sharp, dark gray suit that had cost a significant portion of my archival salary, a suit I had bought for this exact moment. I took the empty seat, next to Mr. Sterling, placed my leather-bound notebook on the table, and gave a slight, polite nod to the room. The CEO of the firm, a man named Arthur Harrington, cleared his throat. He was trying to project authority, but his eyes kept darting nervously towards Sterling. Thank you for joining us, Miss Vance. We appear to have a rather unique supply chain issue to resolve. Before he could continue, Sterling held up a hand. Let's dispense with the pleasantries, Arthur. Here are the facts. Your firm pitched us a product, the Athelred unit, based on a specific proprietary material called Valorite. Your firm guaranteed in a legally binding contract that you could procure this material. You have failed to do so. Your lead architect on this project, Mr. Thorne, has spent the last month misleading my office and failing to provide a viable path to production. As a result, the city is formally terminating its contract with your firm for breach of contract, effective immediately. The penalty clauses will be enforced to their fullest extent. The silence in the room was absolute. Magnus looked like he had been turned to stone. Harrington's face was ashen. Then Magnus found his voice. It was raspy, desperate. This is her fault, he croaked, pointing a trembling finger at me. She sabotaged us. She's an employee of this firm. This is a clear conflict of interest. She had a duty to. Sterling cut him off, his voice like ice. A duty to what, Mr. Thorne? A duty to allow you to take credit for her work, and then sideline her. A duty to hand over her family's proprietary technology after you insulted her and banished her to the basement. I've seen the original project memos. I've spoken to Miss Vance. I have a very clear picture of what happened here. You didn't have a supply chain problem. You had an ethics problem. And now, it's a financial one. Magnus sank back in his chair, defeated. Harrington looked at me, a flicker of something new in his eyes, a dawning realization of who I was, of the power I held. Miss Vance, he began, his voice conciliatory. Aveline, perhaps we can find a new arrangement, a direct partnership between our firms. I let him hang there for a moment before I replied, my voice calm and measured. Mr. Harrington, Vance Composites is a small family-owned company. We are very particular about our partners. We look for integrity, transparency, and a commitment to quality. With all due respect, your firm, under its current project leadership, does not meet our criteria. Then I turned to Magnus. I looked him directly in the eye, and the final, beautiful, vindicating words came to me. You know, Magnus, you were right about one thing. My style is academic. It's based on research, on facts, on structural integrity. Your style is based on theft and deception, and as it turns in the real world, foundations matter. I closed my notebook, stood up, and walked out of the room. I didn't look back. The next day, an all-staff email announced that Magnus Thorne had resigned to pursue other opportunities. Clara told me he was escorted from the building by security, carrying his belongings in a cardboard box. The Athelred contract was dead, and the firm was facing a financial crisis. It wasn't about revenge, it was about consequences. He had built his career on a foundation of lies, and it had collapsed under its own weight, just as any poorly constructed building would. My new office is clean, minimalist, and filled with light. There's a large drafting table where the blueprints for the Athelred unit are spread out, no longer a secret project but the centerpiece of my new company, Aveline Structural Solutions. The city didn't just cancel their contract with Magnus's firm, they opened a new one with me. A direct contract between the city, my design firm, and my family's manufacturing company. A perfect, closed loop of integrity. Clara is here with me. She's my new chief operating officer. She quit the day Magnus was fired, telling Arthur Harrington that she preferred to work for a company where the smartest person in the room was actually in charge. On the wall, in a simple black frame, is the first purchase order from the city. 1,000 Athelred units. And at the bottom, my signature. Not Aveline, the junior architect. Not the quiet girl in the basement. But Aveline Vance, founder and CEO. It's a reclamation. A restoration of a name he tried to erase. So now I want to talk to you. To anyone out there who has been made to feel small. To anyone who has had their voice silenced. Their work stolen. Their light dimmed by someone else's shadow. I need you to understand this. Your value is not determined by those who are incapable of seeing it. Your worth is not a reflection in their distorted mirror. Some people will see your talent as a resource to be exploited. They will see your passion as a tool for their own advancement. They will tell you that you are too much of something, too academic, too passionate, too quiet, too loud, when what they really mean is that you are too much of a threat. My story isn't really about revenge. It's about the importance of building your own house. For 3 years, I tried to build a masterpiece inside someone else's crumbling structure, and I was shocked when they tried to knock down the walls and claim the foundation as their own. The lesson isn't to be more guarded or less trusting. The lesson is to own your own blueprints, to know, with absolute certainty, what materials you are made of, your integrity, your knowledge, your unique legacy. These are the proprietary composites that no one can take from you. They are the things that give you your strength, so don't wait for them to give you a seat at their table. Go out and build your own. Build it with the best materials. Build it on a foundation of your own integrity. And when you are done, don't be surprised when the world comes knocking on your door, asking you to build one for them too. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt like the ghost in the machine, please leave a comment below. Sharing our stories is how we build a community, a shelter for each other. And of course, if you want to hear more stories about turning the tables and reclaiming your power, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. It means the world to me to know you're out there. Thank you for listening.